Welcome everyone to the June 23rd NEMSIS V3 implementation call. We appreciate you being with us this morning. As a reminder, these meetings are recorded. We also appreciate your conversation, your input and your feedback. So during this implementation call, if you have questions or want to unmute yourself or use the chat feature, please feel free to do so. We're happy to take questions, hear your comments, and your feedback on the different topics that we'll have throughout the conversation today. Let's get down to our agenda. First on our agenda this morning is Laurel Baeder. She's going to give us a quick maintenance update.
Good morning, everyone. So we had our maintenance window last week on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I would just like to report that maintenance was completed successfully and everything is updated. We did have a longer than anticipated downtime. I just want to thank everyone for their patience and understanding with any failed submissions during that time.
Are there any questions for Laurel? All right. Thanks, Laurel. Do we have our ET3 partners on the call? We'll come back to that topic. Clay, are you willing to do your topic and then we'll revisit ET3? I think you are on mute. I can see your screen, but I can't hear you.
Okay, I apologize for that. Sorry. Yeah, trying to work through this process of unmuting. Yeah, so thank you very much, folks. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I just wanted to talk a little bit about our continuing efforts to try to just take a look at submission lag, right? So this has become an interesting issue that was has been brought up by federal partners. There hasn't really been a charge or a call to decrease our submission lag. I think every organization that we worked with through the pandemic period was just incredibly impressed with how quickly we're able to make data available. So I don't think that's the issue. I just think there's been this idea of being able to get a good handle on what the time frame actually is in a more granular way. So wanted to just talk a little bit more about this with the vendors and with the states to kind of get a feel for where people are at. So I'm just showing here the standard state data submission dashboard just with all the national data showing. So for states, this is how they look at their submission lag. We have three variables here. The submission lag for us to receive about 25% of the records that occur on any given day is nationally, as of this 12-day time frame, which is the most current, was 38 hours, right? So this is how we kind of have been tracking it, or the states have been tracking it. They receive a push email every Tuesday morning to come in and take a look at this dashboard. This, of course, is just one of many visualizations. They can see how many records they've submitted over this 12-day period. And then those records that had any kind of a warning associated with them, the number of agencies that are reporting per day. And here's where you see that submission lag. What we're wanting to do, I think, is to augment this a little bit for the states who've been asked questions like how complete is our data? How do we track and see how agencies are doing in regards to submitting on a timely fashion? And at the national level, really what is our submission lag? Does it change during certain days of the week or times of the year? Can we kind of track that moving forward? So we've been trying to think of some ideas as to potentially how to augment just this simple three variables that we have here. Kelly with Image Trend was incredibly kind enough to reach out to us and she, of course, and Image Trend has worked on this issue with many states, right, as to how quickly they want submissions to be finalized and then reported out. And Kelly's been kind enough to set up a time with us to show us kind of what Image Trend is doing in regards to this request of states. Any other vendors who'd like to demonstrate kind of the work that they're doing on this topic, we'd love to see it. Our initial kind of feeling is to augment these three elements by showing a way to trend, so that maybe a state can trend submission lag at the state level and maybe at the agency level over time. And then the other idea is related to that first idea. Being able to be much more granular, being able to look at how agencies are doing over the time period. Jay Osby in Wyoming was kind enough to send us a report that he provides for his agencies, and he allowed me to kind of share this. So you can take a look here. This is the way that they handle it in Wyoming. That's a great way. I think Jay's able to see this report by agency. They have, Jay, I don't know, you could speak to this if Jay's on the line, whether it's a requirement or a request that EMS agencies be able to submit their completed PCRs within 2 hours. And so you can see that's where he has his first column after the sorted name of the agency to kind of take a look at how each of the agencies do, right? So Jay on a weekly basis can kind of track where the agencies are. Clearly, some agencies have technical issues and can't submit for a week or something, so he can see where folks are kind of catching up, or where folks are maybe falling behind a little bit, and can reach out and see if there's something that he can do to help with that. Jay, do you want to talk any more about the usefulness of this report? I don't know whether you're on the call. I think you probably are.
Yeah, I could just tell you this was a performance improvement project. We have paid for and in the process of integrating the patient care reports into the receiving facilities. So what we had to do is we had to address how fast are we getting the reports done? And just a couple little fine tuning points on this is we weren't able to really measure when they completed the report. However, we are able to measure how soon they're able to start the report. And that was an easy measure for us. And it gives us an idea. It's kind of like, we know that not everybody's going to get the report done right after a call. There's multiple calls. There's a lot of other stuff. But at least we're finding out, says, well, what could be a threshold? How soon could we get that record through our system that's coming online to get the records into the receiving facility? So this was just kind of, again, a performance improvement project. As you see, we gave the best performers the top of the list. And yeah, if they're starting a lot of records after 12 hours, it's kind of like, yeah, we have an issue here. And technically, according to the law in Wyoming, is a provider is supposed to have that record completed within 2 hours after the unit is back in service. So we know that that's not always going to happen, but at least we had to put a measure in there where we can monitor and see where that's at. Does that help you, Clay?
Oh yeah, Jay. Yeah, Jay, that's great. That's great. It's great to hear how you're using this, and actually how you're measuring this value as well. So that's also a little bit different than maybe what some of the other states have thought about. So that's great. That's great. So with that introduction, as we continue to kind of work through some ideas, we'd love to bring like some storyboard ideas to this group. We'll probably do that in 2 weeks and kind of see if we're meeting needs. But I'd like to open it up for comments for a couple of minutes. Are there software companies that have received requests to do similar reports, or like Jay, are there state data managers who have been requested to kind of look at this, and what have you done to kind of look at the timeliness of data submission? Any comments?
This is Ann in Arizona. It's certainly not as formal as what Jay's done, although I'm interested in this. We can't really use back in service time because of the way our municipal fire agencies use back in service for the engine to go back in service before the call is actually complete. when the paramedic hops on another ambulance. But I've looked at this a little bit with not so much completeness of the call or when it started after back in service, but with submission of the record, the initial upload date versus the incident date time, just to get an idea of what is kind of a median and mean for what agencies are currently submitting from the beginning of the call, because we consistently get that, to when they actually upload or start their initial record. It's not as a complete record, but it gives us an idea.
Yeah, great, Ann. And a related question, and you may not be doing this in Arizona, but for all other states as well. Do you have any requirements or kind of instructions for agencies that say, for example, you're okay holding on to your record for up to this period of time to ensure that it's accurate, right? So if you take an unconscious patient that you find to an emergency department, you're okay holding off on submitting that record until you have a full name and a insurance policy, whatever it may be. Our states kind of requested by agencies to provide that type of a buffer period, either by state representatives or by agencies.
This is Ann. I'll answer real quick, and then I don't know. I'd love to hear what other states say. We don't have anything that's specific. We have a guideline saying within 48 hours, sorry. And I think that's in the draft rules that we're writing in. But it doesn't, 48 hours, I think, is partly because it allows them hopefully to look at the information, review it. And it's just for initial upload. So they can absolutely re-upload that record later. There's a separate time point we can look at for that, which doesn't count against them. So it allows, because the hospital, on the other side of it, the hospitals really want that information, honestly, when the patient gets to the hospital. So there's kind of that balance between the two.
Yeah, that's great, Ann. And say an agency, just like you said, say an agency in Arizona feels comfortable submitting right away, even though it's clear that the record isn't complete. And then they'll come back and fill that in, as they get additional information. That's kind of, I think what you're saying is kind of the ultimate approach, but that they be done within 48 hours. Is your system set up so that it's kind of a wipe and load, right? That the old record just uploads, or do you save like incomplete?
No, so yeah, I don't think it tells you what used to be there. So I think it completely overwrites. So if you accidentally took something out too, it would overwrite the blank. I think if it was submitted with like a different value, like a null, it would overwrite what was in there before.
Okay.
But part of the thing is we have had requests from agencies, and that's one reason I'm kind of interested in this topic, saying, well, what is the bare minimum that I can submit with my first record that is compliant? Not necessarily the final compliance, but what's the bare minimum to get it in within the amount of time? And we haven't really been able to answer that. I mean, because we have very few errors and mostly warnings, it's almost only the mandatory elements that they have to submit the first time for the record to get in. That, and if they said they took the patient somewhere, they have to use a valid code, because we had so many problems with hospitals not getting records. But and then later we look at completeness of data elements, but I don't know if that's really the best way. Just that's how we've done it.
Yeah, and those are great questions. Yeah, I think you're right on, right? And there is a core set of elements that have to be in place. Yeah. So that's great information. Other states or vendors who've been kind of working on this topic, would love to hear from you.
Hey, Clay, Mark Roberts. So way back when the topic came up with Karin about, does NEMSIS even have a standard or have a requirement of when a record should be submitted? And I think at the time it was no, just that it needs to be submitted. So I think, maybe if there was some guidance as far as what it is that you're looking for, then we could use that to help get individual agencies to report in a more timely manner. The other thing that I noticed is that So a record comes in and we get it, it's processed. Then 10 minutes later, they go in and they make a change, it sends it again, right? And this goes on throughout the entire course of the PCR. It's just getting submitted multiple times. And then what was happening was every time we got an update, then we turned around and sent an update to NEMSIS. And so we spent more time, I think, processing updates than really regular processing of new PCRs that are complete, and not sending you the same thing 5 or 6 times in a 24 or 72 hour period. And we were just, it seemed like we were just constantly doing it. And on the image trend side, like Ann said, when a new PCR comes in, it basically deletes or does a soft delete on the old one and adds the new one in. Well, at one point we had it was over 1 million soft deletes in our system, which again, that just creates a lot of overhead. So I guess where I'm going with this is we actually have slowed our submissions down to where we're waiting to at least, we've had that record for at least, I think it's 4 hours or 8 hours before we send it, so that if they are working on it and it is getting submitted, we don't process constantly updates and changes. And we've even asked some of our agencies, our bigger agencies, hold on to them for a period of time before you resubmit them to us, to make sure that they actually get done, so that we're not just processing all these changes. We're in fact, getting completed records in and sending completed records to NEMSIS. So, I mean, it was really problematic, and it takes away from the performance terribly.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great characterization of some of the issues, and Kelly has expressed some of those to us. You're not the only state that has asked Image Trend to do something like that. That's a great description of why that was important. Yeah, so thanks, Mark. That's really helpful.
Clay, this is Jay in Wyoming. I wanted to talk just briefly about the precipitous, what brought this on a little bit more also. It's kind of interesting where you have people just, oh, well, next week when I get back to the office, I'll go ahead and do my patient care reports, or this weekend I'll do them, or something like that. And we came back with a discussion, and it was primarily from some incidents we had that this completing a patient care report isn't about the provider. It is about the patient. And that's why we're trying to get the information as soon as we can to the receiving facility. And I'll just say that we had a lot of complaints about flight services, and I'm not meaning to pick on any individual place, but it was from anesthesiologists, because they wanted to know how much medications the patient had before they were putting them under anesthesia in the operating room. And so it was kind of one of those things that says, okay, we've got to improve this. So that was our thing, is this isn't about the provider. This is about getting the continuum of care and the information to the next level of people on that. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, Jay, it does. It does. Yep. There's two sides to this discussion, no doubt. Yeah, that's really helpful. Very helpful, Jay. That's a great use case.
This is Josh Legler. The state of Oregon has a set of data system performance measures, and one of those is median timeliness of record creation. They just created a new measure they're going to start tracking, which will be the, if I remember right, it's the 90 percentile, or it's the percentage of records, sorry, I said that wrong, the percentage of records that come in within a certain time frame, which I think was 24 hours. And then they can drill down per agency, but they track it at the state level just on a monthly basis in a performance measure tracking chart. One issue we've run into, just so other states using the same product are aware, is that when updates come in through web services submissions, the state system overwrites the record creation date. So we no longer have the original record creation date. We now have a new record creation date that represents when the record was resubmitted. So that's been a problem for us because then as agencies resubmit data, it skews their timeliness. They actually did submit the original report quickly. That resubmission comes in a few days later, and now their timeliness looks all out of whack. So it's something we're dealing with.
Yeah, Josh, good point. Yeah, we faced that with the initial Excel spreadsheet that we sent out, and Jay brought our attention to that if there were resubmissions or even an insurance agency that touches a record, it would reset their record creation time. And then you look at these long delay periods when in fact there was an earlier record that was submitted. Yeah, so that's been helpful information.
And
Thanks,
Clay,
Josh.
this is Cassie from Georgia. I know we have a policy in place right now for 24 hours of submission. And we go based on that initial PCR submission rate. We know there's cases that are going to come in where an agency might have to go in and correct something or amend a PCR submission rate. But where everybody's saying, I think along the lines, if we had some guidance from the NEMSIS tech that states, what is best practices across the national standard for getting these records in a timely manner. Like Jay said, it's that continuum of care. That record's not doing the hospital any good 2 or 3 days after the patient has already left the hospital. And getting that information to them in a timely manner, I think would help if we had some guidance somewhere from the NEMSIS type that said, this is best practice from a hospital standpoint, from an EMS agency standpoint, from a patient standpoint, because ultimately that's what we're there for, is to provide care to the patient across the continuum, not just EMS, because that's not where the patient ends. The patient ends at the hospital getting their treatment, and then they could go on to a rehab facility or be discharged home. Where is their end result? And making sure we follow that patient care across that continuum.
Yeah, Cassie, let me ask you just a quick question. A great description. How do you hold on to the date time of the initial submission of a record, right? So like Josh was talking about, most systems are kind of a wipe and load, right? Where they, or as Ann mentioned, a soft delete. How do you hold on the initial date time of a record submission?
So I know as far as when it's first imported into our system, it's timestamped and it has a record number with it. They can go in and modify it and change it if something needs to be corrected. And then it gets a new case number with a new timestamp, but that first one's still in there for the import of the initial record.
Okay. Okay,
But,
and I interrupted someone who had a question. Was that you, Mark? Sorry.
Yeah, Clay. So I think maybe we need to be a little bit more accurate in how we're describing this, because you're talking about patient care and this type of stuff, and I think we're talking about two different things. The hospital could certainly have the record immediately, right? And in many cases, that's exactly what's happening. The delay is then, when is it getting sent to NEMSIS? And they're not the same thing. Like I said, our PCRs come in and we actually sit on them before we send them to make sure that they're not getting changed again. And so when we're talking about patient care, it's probably most of them, I would say, God, I hate to say that, but they're getting them in a timely manner for whatever reason, based upon whatever their local guidance and rules are. And then there's a whole separate time as to when it actually gets sent to NEMSIS, and that's a whole separate process. So
Right.
I don't want to get confused and think that just because NEMSIS is getting them 38 hours later, that means that the PCR is not getting completed for 38 hours. I mean, the PCR could be completed within 15 minutes. It's just that other process is what's delaying you getting it.
Right, Mark. So you emphasized the technical issues, which was incredibly valuable. I still think that's valuable. With that process, though, that kind of assumption is that the agencies are submitting those records directly to hospitals and not relying on access to a database for connections to HIEs, right? Because if that was the case,
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Well, and now in some states, obviously, that are a statewide system, then maybe a lot of it is being done at the state level. But, you know, in California, for example, each LIMSA is responsible for, you know, reporting the data to the state. But at that LIMSA level or even the agency level, they could be working with HIEs, or they could be, if they're using ImageTrend or another product, they could be presenting that PCR to the hospital at its earliest stage. I mean, at the time that they're sitting on scene, that hospital could have a copy of it that's constantly being updated. So, and I know some vendors have something similar to the hospital hub, but they also might provide fax copies, you know, immediately to the ER. So I think it's important that we have a distinction between when is a PCR available for the facility versus when is it available to be submitted to NEMSIS, or maybe even in the middle would be when is it submitted to the state?
To the state,
right?
Yeah, yep.
And I think they're very distinct times in many cases, except if you're working off of a state system where everybody's on the same one, they're all doing the same thing, and there's no third-party vendors, then maybe that's different. But
yeah,
California for sure, we're all over the place.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for that distinction. I think that's incredibly valuable to make sure we're clear on that.
Hi, Clay. This is Nick with ImageTrend. I just wanted to make a quick comment back to something that Josh had mentioned about tracking, we'll call them subsequent imports into state systems. Just to clarify, ImageTrend does capture an initial incident upload and all subsequent import uploads, and we do display that in our incident history. So states are able to track when the incident first hit their system, and then any updates after that to run whatever metrics that they're hoping to gain from timeliness of importing patient care reports.
Right. Thanks,
Hey,
Nick.
Nick, can I email you a link to the support ticket I submitted so you can kind of see where we were unable to get what we needed?
Sure.
Thanks.
And sorry, this is Ann in Arizona. Nick, maybe I'm confused and they've added something, or maybe I'm using the wrong data point. I know there's an initial upload time, and I know there's an updated, but I didn't think there was a way to pull every last updated. So like in Mark's example, when someone uploads, not that I would really want to know this, but 6 different times an update, I don't think you can tease that out. I think it's the initial and then the last time it was updated, or am I incorrect in that?
They should all be in the EMS incident history data set.
Oh, but not incident you can pull in report writer, right? I mean, because that's the thing with 1 million records, we're
Right.
pulling stats. We're not going into a record.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we could take that offline too if you guys need further assistance.
Thank you.
We can certainly look into that.
And I believe that's something that's more of a newer feature. Maybe way back when it wasn't there. And the other thing that's different is if you go in and you change, let's say one of the changes that the crews make is they change the date or the time, I think the initial date or time of the call, then it creates a new record instead of updating the existing record, or at least that's how it used to do. So, I mean, I think some of this has evolved too, because Nick, the way I remember it was the way Josh described it, but then I know that you guys have made some change to auditing too. So it's great. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yep. The initial incident upload and carrying over that upload history has been out for maybe over 2 years now. So it's been out in the wild for a little bit. And yes, you are right. We do still continue to match on the NEMSIS data points that would indicate uniqueness for a record. So if they do change E times 03 to a different time, they'll consider that unique, which is something we're certainly looking forward to with NEMSIS 3.5 and the UUID.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, that was one of the real impetuses behind the development of the UUID. All right, Fan, this has been a great discussion. I apologize. I want to make sure we can get through the agenda. I've taken a lot of time, but this has been incredibly helpful. Any last comments that are kind of novel that we just want to make sure that are out there for thought?
There's also some really great comments in chat, and we will capture all of those. We keep the chat from every every call. So I think we addressed many of the issues that were brought up in chat, but is there one that we're missing?
Yeah,
I was
thank
going to
you.
mention just briefly that one of the things to address the re-uploads was the addition of IDs to all of the grouping elements that didn't make it into 3.5. But if this kind of idea is important enough, it might eliminate the need for soft deletes if all of the updates could be done in place on the current PCR. So if this is a priority for metrics like this.
All right, David. Yeah, I'll probably reach out to you. I apologize. I'd love to dig into that topic a little bit. I want to make sure I completely understand that. So I'll reach out to you. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to make sure I understand that. Thank you. All right, great. Yeah, I apologize. I wasn't watching the chat. I'm scanning it as well. It looks like we covered a lot of this, but also some great add-on thoughts. So thank you. All right, Julianne, I'll turn it back over to you. It looks like you stole the screen, so perfect.
I did. I stole the screen.
Good.
And the next topic is one that we've had some questions on, and I wanted to bring it to this forum. You're our data collection experts. How are you documenting the leave behind naloxone? So we've got a procedure code that was shared with us that documents the information that's being left behind. Let me pull that up. So the SNOMED procedure code for education about the take-home naloxone or the left-at-home naloxone, but it doesn't document that a medication was left behind. And there's not a value in the medication in e-medications that indicate that it wasn't administered, that it was left with the patient post-EMS interaction. Does anyone have a best practice for how they are documenting when they leave behind a naloxone kit?
Michigan, we're using the education one.
You're using the education one?
Yeah.
David? I was hoping you had.
Oh yeah, so we do it outside of the medications section. It's custom data points for us.
Okay. Do you find that it's being used in narrative and not as data elements or custom data elements? Any of the vendors or state data managers seeing that? Okay, thanks for sharing that, Ridgely. Ridgely put into chat one of the codes that one of her services are using. Thanks for adding that. And we've had this question a couple of times, so we just want to be able to make a best practice recommendation for when we get this question. So if any of you are using, if any of you have a practice or a process that seems to really work for your agencies, we would love it if you'd be willing to share, and also what you'd love to see come out from NEMSIS as far as any recommendation on standardizing documentation for the leave behind naloxone kits, and if that's something that you'd like to see. Next on our agenda is the use of the term excited delirium. Eric Chaney is going to talk a little bit about that. Eric, you ready to take that on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And this is just a brief introductory discussion on this topic. There are several different groups looking at excited delirium. There are several states looking at excited delirium. And what seems to be the topic of discussion, and you're going to hear some of my bias in this, and I'll be very clear when that comes out. There's a lot of discussion about the term and title, in that we should not be using that, or maybe we will not be using that moving forward. Ultimately, this is something that the states and localities can establish. We're going to probably take our direction from a panel that's working together right now through ACEP, and I believe NEMSIS has some representation on that as well. My bias part of this is that there's a lot of politics entering medicine at this point in time. My concern is not so much what term gets used here, is that we don't lose the fact that we're basically identifying something where someone who is extremely agitated, very difficult to work with, is not cooperating with the EMS personnel and basically representing a threat to themselves and to the personnel trying to care for them. And specifically, I'd like to focus more on how we should care for them and how we should give the EMS personnel the ability to back out and say it's not safe. And I will continuously fight that fight. I wanted to bring it up here because you're going to hear a lot about the different terminology and things that are being used. There's people talking about specific recommendations for how it's coded. You may have those conversations going on in your state right now, just to let you know they're going on at the federal or national level as well. That's really all I have to say about it. As I said, there's a bias of myself in there that I want to focus more on the care side of it, and all the violence that's being reported with EMS personnel. And there was just another instance last night. We have calls with the folks that were dealing with the COVID side of the house, and part of the spillover is we discuss what's going on in certain areas. There was one city over the weekend that had 63 shootings over the weekend. I'm more concerned about those things other than what we title a particular term, but that's my opinion. The NHTSA opinion and the NHTSA way moving forward will be to establish some sort of an agreement to what these terms should look like, and then you'll probably see that information come to you through this forum. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but that's really the discussion on the topic.
Any questions for Eric? Okay. You've got the next topic as well, Eric, for documenting violence against providers.
I talked about this at the last meeting. I believe we are just very early on. I have submitted what we call the one pager and then some information as a part of our projects for the upcoming year to look at tracking violence against EMS personnel. And I've had numerous discussions, very early stages of discussions about data collection, and they have ranged from how this would be done, keeping it separate from the patient care report, making sure that it was discoverable, non-discoverable. Obviously, we'll work with legal on that. Whether it would be something that was tracked at the local, whether it would go to the state and then the state to the Fed, whether there would be just one particular tracking point, like in AEMT's effort that events, it was called. And so there's a lot of data collection, at least on my part, information collection on my part, trying to determine what the best way for this moving forward. But again, this is something that for whatever reason, I'm really, well, not for whatever reason. I'm really dug in on this because I see just an increasing amount of violence against EMS personnel. And I look at other countries where they have enacted specific laws that make it a very serious crime to basically act out against EMS or emergency responders, as they call them. So more to come on that. If you have programs, if you have ways of tracking that, or you think you have the holy grail for how to complete that system, I would love to have more information on it and love to hear your thoughts. So you can either send them to me by email. I think most of you have my cell phone number. You're more than welcome. Just send it or give me a call. And that's all I have on violence, Julianne. Unless somebody has questions, I'm always happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Eric? Okay. Next on the agenda is technical guidance for UUID implementation. Josh Legler has that topic.
Okay, thanks, Julianne. Let me get my screen sharing up here. So I think you're all aware of this position paper that came out, a joint position paper from NEMSIS, NESEMSO, and the American College of Surgeons on linking EMS and trauma registry records. And this position paper really centers around this, this diagram here, that was put together that says that with NEMSIS 3.5, we could use the UUID as a way to link a trauma record to an EMS record, and that those records could then be relinked, rejoined to each other at different levels, state, national, et cetera, for analysis purposes. So that paper was kind of the position paper saying this is the approach that ACS and NESEMSO and NEMSIS recommend going forward. We have drafted a technical guide now from the NEMSIS TAC that will dive a little more into kind of the details, the nuts and bolts of accomplishing that sort of an implementation. This morning, I want to just give you a brief overview of the content of this technical guide. I think it'll be published soon, but want to give you kind of a heads up of what's in it and the scope of it, and also get your feedback if you think there's considerations that we need to address in this guide that we haven't already addressed. So the guide starts with the foundation of that same diagram, indicating that a trauma registrar would have access to EMS data at the time they are filling out their trauma record, and that they would be able to handpick an EMS record that represents the transport to their hospital for that trauma patient. And that when they do that, the data from the EMS record would be imported, and the UUID from the EMS patient care report would be recorded in their trauma record. So this approach really has as its foundation the idea that data integration between EMS systems and trauma systems is going to be routine, is going to happen everywhere on a regular basis. That trauma systems will have the ability to receive data from NEMSIS compliant EPCR systems, have a place to kind of store that data or stage it for lookups and searches, and then pull it into trauma records. So that is foundational to all of this working. So then the guide will go through several kind of technical aspects of accomplishing this integration. It'll talk about sending records to the trauma registry. It's going to recommend using NEMSIS Web Services as the mechanism for doing so. It provides some guidance on considerations about deciding which records to send to the trauma registry. None of this is requirements. This is guidance and like, here's what you might want to do. It considers important data elements that should be sent to the trauma registry that would be important for trauma quality and analysis and assurance. It talks about in the trauma registry, how the trauma registry would provide a user interface that allows trauma registrars to see potential matching records from EMS and pick the one that represents the transport into their hospital. And as we all know, there could be multiple EMS records for a particular trauma patient at an incident. It then talks about pulling that UUID, where to find it in the patient care report, and pull it into the trauma record. And then when exporting the trauma record in the NTDS format, what that looks like in that NTDS XML export. Then it talks about how those records might be relinked with each other in regional, state, and national registries. At the end of the guide, we have a few other considerations that are just briefly discussed. We know that there could be multiple EMS records matched to a trauma record. The NTDS specifies that they're looking for the scene transport to the initial hospital. That's the one they want linked for NTDS purposes. But for local purposes, people might want to link up with all of the EMS records that matched their trauma record. And similarly, there could be multiple trauma records associated with a single EMS record as the patient moved through multiple stages of trauma care in hospitals. There's the concept of unlinking an EMS record from a trauma record if it was accidentally linked and needs to be undone. Handling EMS record updates that occur after the linkage has been made initially. And then considerations on how implementations might link EMS records from NEMSIS versions prior to 350, which don't have the UUID. And finally, the idea of sending some trauma registry data, outcome data, back to the EMS data system. So that's the scope of what this guide covers. And I wanted to see from all of you if there are other kind of questions out there that we should address in this guide.
Hey, Josh, Mark Roberts.
Yeah.
Is the thought that this is going to be done at the individual agency level and not at the state level? Because, you know, a lot of times at the state level, we're just aggregating the data. We're not the legal medical record. And so is the intention that each agency and its vendor would potentially participate in this at the local level for that hospital? I mean, how would you know that I'm supposed to send this record, the CPCR, to this trauma vendor for this particular hospital? I mean, you'd have to know which hospitals are using what vendor. And then just knowing how things work at a state level, I'm sure there would be some type of a cost to us to export this data to everybody. And I don't even know, do we have permission to export all this data out? I mean, we have permission to receive it, run reports, and report it to NEMSIS, but sharing it with somebody else, I don't know. So that would just be a concern.
Yeah, the position paper from ACS and NESEMSO addresses more of your second question about having agreements in place and so on to have the legal ability to share the data with trauma registries. Your first question is one that I thought about a little bit and is not really addressed, I think, very well in this guide, which is, yeah, at what level does this integration occur? So I think the most common example is a lot of states have a statewide EMS registry and they have a statewide trauma registry. And they may have a lot of hospitals that do direct data entry into that statewide trauma registry. So it makes sense to link those two state systems with each other to accomplish that integration. However, in those same states, there are often a few level 1 trauma centers who run their own trauma registry that's, you know, hosted by their own vendor or within their hospital. And so then that means there's a secondary need for that state EMS system to send data to that particular hospital's trauma registry. And then in that case, they would need to make sure they only send data for patients who went to that hospital and would have to get the legal agreements in place to do that setup. Yeah, there's some considerations that are not really addressed here regarding that question. So we'll see, maybe we can do something to address that a little better.
And one other thing, is this dependent upon the format or just in general? Because, you know, you got the NTDB format and then you have the ITDX format that some vendors are moving to. You know, does it apply? Does it not matter which format it is? It's just this is the way it should be done, or is it looking at NTDB as that's the national standard? I just kind of curious.
Yeah, this uses NTDS because it was the American College of Surgeons that added UUID to the NTDS format in 2021. And so this is really talking about it from that perspective. It's saying, hey, you could integrate your systems. Now, when you send data to the NTDB, this is where that UUID is going to be inserted in the XML export in NTDS format. Let's see, Anne asked, we would want all found EMS records to be able to be linked to a trauma record. Would this guide include a feature where the outcome trauma registry data would, once linked, be sent back down to the state EMS system and any linked records? Yeah, those were addressed in the additional considerations down here. So linking multiple EMS records to a trauma record talks about how there's very likely a need and a desire to do that, that the NTDS has currently limited it to just the EMS transport to the receiving hospital that received the patient from scene. Now we've talked with ACS, they might consider broadening what they allow in the future, but right now they only allow that one UUID to be attached to the trauma record. But that doesn't mean you couldn't link multiple records at the local trauma registry level. You would just only send certain data to ACS. So that's addressed there a little bit. And then, yeah, sending trauma registry back to the EMS data system, a little bit of discussion about that as well and how that may be accomplished. All right, any other questions or topics we should be sure to address in this guide?
Hey, Josh, this is Clay. I'll just comment this document that Josh has reviewed. Thank you, Josh. That was a great review. It's under review by the ACS, also by the Office of EMS at NHTSA. We've also distributed to the UUID work group that's been kind of commenting on this process and providing feedback. So we hope to have any collected comments hopefully within this week. If you're part of that work group, if you have comments, we'd love to hear them, even if they're brief, right? We could kind of flesh them out here at the TAC. So if you get comments back to us, we'll try to finalize this probably by the end of next week if we could.
This is Eric. I'm just confirming it went into the SEMSO and to their other data subgroup, correct? For comment.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, Josh. We're going to take a second real quick and do the ET3 update with John Beckett. John, did you want to share your screen, or is yours just verbal? John, are you there? I know we've had some.
I'm sorry, Julianne, can you hear me?
Yes, now we've got you.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, if I could share my screen real quick, that would be great.
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay. Okay, just real quick, I just want to just real quick remind folks that, yeah, we do have our ePCR counts coming in pretty good, and you know, we're well above the 6 million mark in terms of our records that we've been able to capture. So just wanted to say that our counts here are ticking up, and we'll have some June numbers sometime soon. There's about 18 remaining participants. We've got a couple of new participants that have come in, and we're expecting that the count of active submitters should be rising as well. So it's one thing to obviously be registered and having a security key, but not sending us data yet. But that's something that we want to improve on and see if we can get this number up to the as closest to the 84 participants as possible. In terms of current historical submission issues, I think the biggest one on the table has been really the migration of version 2 or version 3.3.4, which must be migrated up to 3.4 in order for us to receive it and be able to ingest it. So that is a deterrent currently. We also have a couple of issues whereby we have some records that are dropped. And I think we looked at that last week or a couple of weeks ago at the last implementation meeting where if you're giving us an incorrect de-agency field value, it's not going to get into the system. So we do have a list of vendors as well as participants that we're reaching out to correct this issue. And I think we're going to get this cleared up sometime in the next month or so. In terms of multiple PCRs, we are seeing some vendors send in records where there are duplicate records being sent in multiple submissions. So that is something, and again, I think we can go directly to the vendor or to the participant to see what might be happening and see if we can clear that up. And we are taking steps on our side to handle those duplicates as they're coming in. So you'll hear from us on that. Just real quick, in terms of next steps, we are preparing for 3.5. Still targeting the fall, probably sometime in the month of September. And there will be a number of documentation you'll find out on the NEMSIS ET3 website. In addition to that, we're also trying to outreach to participants to go in and register for the participant role. If you want to see the data that's been submitted, this is going to be required. And this is again a step that we haven't taken or haven't seen participants taken because the focus has been on getting the data submitted. So if you want to do any level of monitoring, data management, as well as reporting, that participant role is going to be very important for you to go in and go ahead and register for. The last thing I just want to point out is we did have some production operations updates. We did have an unplanned outage this past weekend. It started on the 17th and ended on the 20th. It is something that we had some issues with our web server, and that has been cleared up. So if any of the participant or vendors sent us anything and you received failed messages during that system outage, we are going to ask that you resubmit those PCR records so they do get into the system. So that's really all the updates that I have. And if there's any questions or comments.
Hey, John, this is Mark from California. Are you able to determine at this point of all the records that you're getting, how many actually include any of the ET3 elements? I'm still not seeing any in California that are being collected and or reported. So I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page here.
Sure. Yeah, we're working on some reporting, Mark, right now that's going to give us that feedback. And I've seen some drafts of the reports, so we just need to get them through. So I think probably by the end of July, we can come back and provide you with some updates on what you're asking about. That's a very important thing because obviously getting the data is one thing, but what's being submitted and making sure that we're getting values for things that we're expecting, that's something we're just beginning to dig into. So give us another month and we should have some answers there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks. I just want to make sure that we're not doing something on this end that's not capturing the fields. And so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. If there's no more questions, Julianne, I'll just turn that back over to you.
All right. Thank you, John. Next on the agenda is back to Clay for an update on the NEMSIS HIE efforts.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana. I'll just share my screen, show one quick slide. Thank you for people's patience. I'll be I'll be quick here. We have an e-outcomes work group that is needs to meet again, and so we'll send out a doodle poll to find a common time for that e-outcomes work group. Thank you for your comments and review so far. That has led us to put together some more clear kind of deliverables. And we now have contracts working through the university system for Andrea Forquette. I hear at the bottom of the screen here who works with IHE and is our fire developer. Also, we're working with Jay Lyle with an active contract, and then Josh is going to help us with some element mapping. I'll talk about that just real briefly. Here are the 4 items that we plan to try to accomplish this summer, fall, and perhaps just for balloting purposes into the beginning of 2022. This first item, the renewal of the current HL7 implementation guide that offers a CDA level 1 and level 3 for the movement of select EMS NEMSIS variables from the back of an ambulance as a use case to an emergency department, right? So this is the sending of data before a patient arrives or at the time of patient arrival. That through ANSI needs to be reballoted and reapproved every 5 years. It has been 5 years, and we are happy to report that with the work of Jay Lyle, we have now reballoted that version of the CDA that was for version 3.4. It's now been reballoted. It's now with ANSI for final approval, so it will be reposted on the HL7 website with corrections. David at Beyond Lucid and others had found some errors that were found in the XML exam, the XSD examples that were available in that implementation guide. Those have been corrected, so it stands as a slightly corrected renewal of that implementation guide. So our next step for HL7 in regards to the existing kind of CDA format that we have provided in the past is to now ballot that exact same use case implementation guide for 3.5. And so Jay is now actively working on that through a contract with us. So that work is ongoing. We've had lots of discussions in the e-outcomes work group about fire implementations, particularly about this idea of getting the e-outcomes section of the NEMSIS data set back to agencies, get that data completed so that it can be sent to the state, sent to the national repository using our web services system of data exchange. So that work continues with the e-outcomes work group. We have some updates there that we'll provide to that work group. Andrea Forquette had really, before she kind of engaged closely with NEMSIS, she had developed what was called the core implementation guide that really was a fire implementation of getting e-outcomes data back into the EMS medical record. It was based on 3.4, so it needs to be updated to 3.5. She utilized a number of ISO standards, international standard values that where NEMSIS is very US centric. So there's some changes that need to be made. We've contracted now with Andrea to tighten that up. And she's also adding a volume 4 to this document, the core document that will actually include the e-outcomes template that this e-outcomes work group is working on. Josh will be doing the exact mapping, right, between 3.5 elements and fire elements in that regard. And there will be some mismatches, some misfits that we'll have to go back to ONC and ask for direction on those. So that's kind of where we stand on that. We met with ONC yesterday for an hour. They're incredibly excited about this work and are willing to engage IHE to ensure that we have very active connect-a-thons. And so I think like what's happened in the past with HL7, I think those efforts will be augmented, whereas vendors truly want to make sure that this runs with Epic or this runs with Cerner, that there is this kind of an exchange. ONC's willing to put forth resources to ensure that those actual connections are made and are working in these connect-a-thons. And so I think if you as a vendor are really willing to kind of spend some time and engage with us over the summer and fall, there'll be some good progress that can be made in regards to sharing of NEMSIS 3.5 data. So I'll stop there, see if there's any questions about forward progress in regards to interoperability. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Julianne.
Thank you, Clay. Next on the agenda, Eric again is going to talk about the body-worn camera Quickstart guide. And I'll put do you want me to share that on the screen, Eric?
Please do.
Okay.
So as many of you know, we've talked about the development of this in the past. We've worked with Page Wolfberg and Worth once again to develop this Quickstart guide for legal considerations for EMS agencies. And if you'll go to page 2, Julianne, I think there's a box about halfway down the corner that kind of hits the big primary bullets right there. Key legal consideration, right there, stop. So basically we asked them to assist us with this. And my thinking was, hey, look, they'll put together a guidebook, and this guidebook will answer all our questions. And we will be able to put this out to everyone so they'll know how to implement their body cam program. And I learned very quickly after reading this multiple times, and then the final product that you see here, that there are many, many twists and turns to a body cam program, including the key legal considerations that are in that gray box in the bottom there. We specifically asked him to address HIPAA and whether or not body cam video was considered HIPAA, whether it had to be HIPAA compliant or not, and what were the key considerations regarding that. The state invasion of privacy laws are different everywhere you go, so it is critical that you know your state and local laws and policies regarding body cam and collecting someone's video without their permission. Wiretap and eavesdropping laws actually come into play in some places. State open records laws, data retention requirements are a piece that I was particularly interested in. Is this like our EPCRs where we have to keep them for so many years? And then just overall, what are some key things you should think of if you're going to establish a body-worn camera policy? So we put this out to this group. It's been sent out to everybody I could possibly think of. It's for widest dissemination. And I have to say, after reading this, I have as many questions as I did when we started this project. There are so many things to think about when you're doing this, the least of which is the cost, the amount of storage it's going to take, who's going to be able to access it, when they're going to be able to access it, for what purposes is it allowed to be accessed, what happens when someone looks at things they shouldn't, so on and so forth. All things that you've talked about before in most cases with your EPCR systems, but now a little different with video. Just a whole host of topics here. It's really meant to, I think now that I look at the final product, it's probably going to generate more questions. And for now, this is my end point. You've heard me say this with like the HIPAA documents. We produced all the HIPAA documents I think that anyone needs for their system or program. And if I'm wrong, please let me know and we'll consider the next project, but I think we're good on HIPAA. For body cams, this is as far right now as NHTSA's Office of EMS is going to go. We've put out kind of the general primer, which is what we consider this document, the things you should consider. We're not going down the road of this is how to do it, this is what you must do. I think that is very, very specific to each independent EMS agency. And we're happy to answer any questions on this document. If you have things for Page, Wolfberg, and Worth specifically out of this that you want additional information on, happy to pass that along. And then I think you'll see them speaking on this topic at several of the national meetings and certainly some of the conferences and stuff as we move forward. So With that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions on the body cam document. Thanks, Julian.
Eric, there's a question in the chat from EPR Systems. They're curious about how this relates to other pictures taken at the scene.
I'm not sure that we addressed that specifically. We can certainly ask. Certainly the wiretap and eavesdropping laws probably would not apply. State invasion of privacy laws could apply. We've talked about photos in some of the HIPAA documents in the past, because I know, we have the capability of capturing pictures and photos in many of the existing systems now. I'll be happy to ask and forward that information back out to the group, but the primary purpose of this was specific to video.
And I put the link in the chat. You are welcome to download that guide and share it with anybody who may be interested. All right, next on the agenda, registration is open for the V3 implementation annual meeting. It is August 3rd through the 5th. That is available to all of our stakeholders. The primary or target audiences will be state and territory data managers and those involved in EMS data, data director or EMS directors, EMS software vendors and developers, and then our national partners. Those are the target audiences for the V3 implementation meeting. You are welcome to register, and additional connection information and details will be sent to you. The boot camp is also still available. Oh, Lori, would you put that link in the chat? Oh, she already did. She read my mind. The boot camp, we are still taking registrations for the boot camp. This one is specific to state and territory data managers, EMS directors, and those who are specifically involved with state implementation of version 3.5. It will be specific to all things 3.5, implementing and transitioning that new data standard into your state. So registration is still available on that. Lori, if you wouldn't mind throwing that link in the chat as well. So boot camp is July 13th. So we're just probably about 3-4 weeks out from boot camp and a couple of months out from V3 annual meeting. All right. Eric, is there any other items from the Office of EMS that you wanted to bring up?
Not at this time, Julianne, not that I can think of.
Okay. For open forum, are there any questions, comments, feedback that anyone in this meeting would like to bring forward? Okay. There is a July training coming up, vendor tools and resources. This will be July 6th. It is specific to vendors, but anyone is welcome to listen in and participate. One more, our upcoming meetings, next one will be July 14 and July 28th. We did get feedback that several people had difficulty connecting to the Zoom meeting this morning. And we will check into that and see if there's anything we can do to improve that connection experience for all of you. And I think we're done for the day. Thank you for being here with us, taking time out of your busy days. We appreciate you bringing comments and your concerns forward. Thank you and have a terrific rest of your day. Thanks.